When the Queen's sealed will was finally revealed behind palace doors, a single omission left the royals in stunned silence. Prince Harry's name was nowhere to be found, and the one who confirmed it? None other than Princess Anne. What followed would forever fracture the fragile threads holding the monarchy together. It began with a whisper, barely audible at first, a soft, shivering rumor that spread through the marble halls of Buckingham like a draught through a locked crypt. At first, no one believed it. Prince Harry, once the adored boy with the mischievous smile, the war hero, the younger brother who danced behind William at royal engagements, had been completely written out of Queen Elizabeth's private will, not overlooked, not minimized, erased. The disbelief echoed across royal watchers, courtiers, and aides alike. But behind closed doors, a different reality was unfolding. Princess Anne had known. Not only had she known, but she had been the one entrusted to confirm it when the time came. The confirmation didn't come in a press release or televised statement. It came in a hushed voice behind gilded walls. A trusted staffer, too rattled to maintain composure, slipped the truth to a longtime royal correspondent. Within hours, it was everywhere. Prince Harry, not mentioned in Queen's private will, read the front-page banner of one major tabloid. Panic erupted within the palace. Senior aides scrambled to shield the truth from Harry, desperate to deliver it privately before it became fuel for international headlines. But it was too late. The leak had detonated like a grenade at the heart of the monarchy. Inside the Sussex household, Meghan's intuition had already signaled something was wrong. Following the Queen's funeral, the subtle shifts had begun. Polite emails left unanswered. Ceremonial invitations carefully worded to exclude, a haunting silence from royal relatives who once called Harry their own. Meghan noticed before Harry did. And as the pieces came together, suspicion crystallized into something far darker. Confirmation. For Harry, the revelation was more than a legal matter. It was a soul, deep rupture, a haunting realization that his place within the family had not just been diminished, but completely revoked in the most final and irreversible way possible. The very woman who had once held him by the hand during Trooping the Color had chosen to close her final chapter without even mentioning his name. To the public, this was a royal drama. To Harry, it was abandonment. But in the shadows of this storm, one figure stood alone, stoic, silent, bound by a promise made in the Queen's final months, Princess Anne. She had not wanted this burden, but she had accepted it, and as the royal family tried to contain the fallout, Anne's private burden would soon become a public reckoning. But what could have driven Queen Elizabeth to erase her own grandson from her final testament? The answer may lie buried in the decades-old wounds of betrayal and a secret promise made to Princess Anne. In her final months, Queen Elizabeth is said to have made one last confidential pact, a whispered legacy passed only to Anne. And in that moment, Harry's fate was sealed long before the world ever suspected. Behind the regal poise and unwavering public calm, Queen Elizabeth was haunted by a truth she dared not speak aloud. The monarchy she had upheld for over 7 decades was splintering before her eyes, and it wasn't the scandals or public scrutiny that troubled her most. It was the divide within her own blood. The Sussex fracture had wounded her deeper than anyone realized, not because of the headlines, but because of what it represented, a legacy veering off course. And in the stillness of her private chambers, the Queen made a decision that would shape the royal family's future, long after her death. She summoned the one person she believed could carry the burden with both silence and strength, her only daughter, Anne. What transpired in that final veiled conversation between mother and daughter has never been officially recorded, but palace insiders have hinted at its magnitude. The Queen, reportedly gripped by both sorrow and determination, handed Anne a sealed clause, an addendum to her personal will, never to be shared, not even with Charles or William. Only Anne would carry its weight, not out of favoritism, but necessity. The crown had always been built on silence, and Anne had spent a lifetime mastering that code. She had never craved the spotlight, never meddled in the drama. She was loyal to the institution, but even more so to her mother. That made her the only candidate for such a task. For Anne, accepting that role came at a price. She knew what was inside that sealed clause long before she opened it. Harry's name, or rather, his absence, was not an oversight. It was intentional. The Queen feared that including Harry, after his dramatic break from royal duty and public criticisms of the institution, would not only divide the family further, but threaten the public's already fragile trust in the monarchy. Her love for him was real, but her duty to the crown was absolute. In that brutal equation, Harry had become the variable she had to eliminate to protect the whole. Anne, bound by duty and tradition, did not protest. But privately, she was torn. Memories of a young Harry chasing after William in the palace gardens, of his laughter echoing through Balmoral's halls, collided with the reality of being tasked with keeping him out. The Queen, ever cautious of family implosion, had tasked Anne not just with delivering this silent blow, but with containing its aftermath. Anne's role wasn't just to keep a secret, it was to stop a war from igniting within the very walls of the monarchy. In the days following the Queen's passing, Anne clutched that sealed clause like a curse. The others moved through grief with ceremonial dignity, but Anne held a secret that threatened to blow it all apart. She knew the time would come when silence wouldn't be enough. She could delay the reckoning, but not prevent it. Because secrets of this scale never stay buried forever. But even Anne couldn't contain the storm once Meghan discovered the Queen's betrayal and made sure Harry heard it from the press before he ever heard it from family. When Meghan realized the truth, she didn't weep, she fought. A leak from inside the palace would become her revenge. But she never expected the fallout to hit Harry harder than anyone else. It began with a simple mistake. A forgotten email thread left exposed on a shared staff account. Meghan hadn't been looking for it. She had long stopped expecting kindness or transparency from the palace. But when a friend in the press tipped her off about chatter surrounding the Queen's private will, she followed the thread like a blood trail. Buried among dozens of routine logistics and protocol memos was a casual line from a senior aide. Anne has confirmed no mention of Harry in the sealed clause. A second aide had replied, "Best to keep this quiet for now. Timing is delicate." That was it. No explanation, no concern. Just a cold, clinical confirmation that her husband had been quietly erased by the very family that once paraded him in uniform and gold. Meghan was stunned, not angry at first, just paralyzed. Then came the rage. The betrayal wasn't just toward Harry, it was toward their children, their family unit, their dignity. For days, she wrestled with how to break it to him. But when she finally did, there were no screams, no accusations, just silence. Harry sat across from her, reading the words over and over again. His eyes didn't look up. He didn't collapse. He just stared into a void, as if searching for the boy who once believed in the sanctity of crowns and the permanence of family. Meghan later described it as the most painful silence she had ever witnessed, because this wasn't about money or legacy, it was about worth. And in the eyes of the monarchy, Harry had been deemed unworthy. She couldn't let that stand. With the discipline of someone who had played by the palace's rules only to be burned, Meghan picked up her phone. Not to cry, not to beg, but to act. She contacted a journalist she trusted who had never twisted her words. She laid it out cleanly. The sealed clause, Anne's confirmation, the internal emails. Within 48 hours, the world erupted. Prince Harry left out of will, palace in crisis. It was on every screen, every feed, every front page. The leak struck like lightning through a centuries-old castle, lighting up every hidden corridor. Inside the palace, chaos reigned. Charles, blindsided and furious, demanded silence. Camilla urged for a counter-narrative to protect the institution's dignity. But the damage had already been done. Public sentiment began to shift. Sympathy for Harry surged. And yet, not everyone applauded Meghan's bold move. Royal loyalists called it treachery. Courtiers whispered that it was a deliberate act of sabotage against the very institution she had vowed to leave behind. But Meghan didn't care. To her, this was never about optics. It was about justice. Still, one voice remained disturbingly absent amid the noise: Princess Anne. No denial, no rebuttal, no statement, just silence. And that silence spoke louder than any headline. But while the world focused on Meghan's defiance, the palace was already crumbling under the weight of a hidden truth Anne could no longer suppress. He begged her to say it wasn't true. But Anne, ever bound by duty, looked Harry in the eyes and confirmed the unthinkable. What followed was a breakdown that stunned even the most hardened royals. After the storm of headlines, after the silence from Clarence House, and after the chaos behind palace gates, Harry could no longer wait. His calls to Charles had been met with formal deflection. William had offered vague reassurance but refused to say more. And so, with nowhere else to turn, Harry asked for a meeting with the one person who had been named in every report but had said nothing to Princess Anne. She didn't avoid him. She didn't delay. She invited him to speak in private, not out of strategy, but because she owed it to the boy she had once watched grow up under his mother's shadow. But this was no longer the same boy, and she was no longer just an aunt. The room was quiet, solemn, heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Harry's voice trembled not with rage, but with grief. "Tell me she didn't do this to me," he whispered, clinging to the hope that this was all some twisted misunderstanding. But Anne didn't flinch. She didn't soften the blow. She looked him straight in the eye and said, with painful clarity, "She loved you, but yes, she left you nothing." The words shattered something deep within him. For a moment, Harry said nothing. Then his body gave way to the emotional weight he'd carried since the Queen's death. The reports weren't just true, they were worse than imagined. He collapsed into the chair beside her, head in his hands, sobbing. The kind of sobbing that comes not from a single wound, but from years of layered betrayal crashing down in a single moment. "I was her grandson," he muttered over and over, as if trying to convince himself, or perhaps her, that that fact alone should have meant something. Anne, who had always been the pillar of composure, felt the sharp sting of her role. She didn't comfort him. She couldn't. That wasn't what she was there for. She had promised the Queen she would be honest, and in that honesty, she betrayed someone she had once held close. She wasn't heartless. She was human, but she was also a Windsor. And Windsors don't weep over consequences, they endure them. This moment was the end of something intangible yet sacred. Harry's relationship with the royal family wasn't just strained, it was broken. Not because of the press, or Meghan, or even the public fallout. It broke in that room, when the only royal who had dared to speak the truth confirmed the final insult. It wasn't money he had lost, it was history, legacy, identity. The very birthright he had once carried with pride had been stripped away not by outsiders, but from within. But as Harry mourned the loss of his legacy, Princess Catherine quietly stepped into a role that made Camilla and even Charles uneasy. While one royal was cast out, another was quietly lifted up. Buried in the Queen's sealed will was a symbolic inheritance meant only for Catherine, and it spoke volumes about the crown's future. It happened quietly, without ceremony or press. While the world was fixated on Harry's exclusion and the aftershocks it sent through royal circles, a sealed delivery arrived at Kensington Palace. The Queen's personal solicitor, acting on instructions known to almost no one, handed it directly to Catherine with a solemn nod and no further explanation. It was a simple case, wrapped in velvet and bearing the royal crest, but inside was something that would change everything. Within the case lay one of the most mysterious royal heirlooms, Diana's sapphire pendant, a piece rarely seen, almost mythologized within the family. But that wasn't what made Catherine gasp. Beneath it, folded with immaculate care, was a handwritten note addressed not to Catherine by name, but simply, "To the future." The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Elizabeth's. The words were brief, careful, and impossibly weighty. She wrote of strength, of grace, of the burden that came with the crown's love, and of the quiet power and restraint. And then, in her final line, "You are the bridge to everything we must become." Catherine wept, not because of what she had received, but because of what it meant. She hadn't asked for this. But now, the Queen's final gesture had placed her firmly in the center of the monarchy's next chapter. No one else had known. No public announcement was made. The pendant remained hidden, but Catherine understood the meaning. This was not a gift, it was an assignment. She had been chosen, quietly and deliberately, to carry forward not just Elizabeth's ideals, but the legacy of Diana, too. A crown not yet worn, but already resting on her shoulders. While public attention remained fixed on Harry's downfall, Camilla reportedly noticed the subtle shift in power. Charles had not objected to Catherine's increasing visibility. But it wasn't Charles she needed to impress, it was Anne. And in Anne, Catherine found an unlikely ally. Anne saw the poise, the restraint, the measured approach to duty that reminded her of the Queen herself. Where Meghan had brought fire, Catherine brought form. And Anne, though never one to offer praise lightly, made it clear this was the path the Queen had envisioned. Still, not everyone was at peace. Camilla, already battling private resentment over public comparisons to Diana, now saw her influence diluted. The pendant wasn't just a necklace, it was a verdict. The Queen had drawn her final lines, and Catherine had emerged on the right side of history. All while Harry, on the outside, watched his past unravel as Catherine's future took shape. 2 grandchildren, 2 destinies. One left behind, the other raised in silence to carry a future that no longer belonged to them both. But while Catherine carried the crown's future with grace, the monarchy's foundation was still cracking, and it was William who would next confront the truth his father tried to bury. Prince William had kept quiet for too long, but after Harry's collapse and Catherine's private revelation, he stormed into Clarence's house to confront Charles, and what he uncovered left him furious. For weeks, William had watched the storm from the eye of it. He had tried to play peacemaker, tried to stay neutral, but neutrality was no longer an option. Harry's devastation wasn't just personal, it was public. The monarchy was bleeding trust, and the silence from his father had become deafening. What tipped the scale wasn't the press or even Anne's confirmation, it was Catherine. Her quiet inheritance, the Queen's handwritten words, and the weight of a future she never asked to carry. William could no longer ignore the fractures. So he demanded the one thing no one else had dared, a direct confrontation with King Charles himself. He arrived unannounced, unguarded, and unrestrained. No titles, no royal pleasantries, just a son asking his father why their family was once again being torn apart in the name of protocol. Why was Harry excluded? He asked, eyes locked. Why was this family divided again in secret? Charles, caught between monarch and father, gave the same answer he had offered aides and advisors. Your brother made his choice. The Queen respected that. But William didn't believe it. He saw it for what it was, a pre-packaged line, a justification too clean, too rehearsed. He wanted the truth. Not the one that had been rehearsed in staterooms, but the one buried beneath decades of wounds. In the heat of the exchange, William turned to his father's own history. The years of misunderstanding between Charles and the Queen. The moments of public failure and private disappointment. William reminded him that he, too, had once felt abandoned by the very institution he now claimed to defend. But Charles didn't waver. He insisted the Queen made her decision with full awareness and clarity. That it wasn't about punishment, it was about preservation. William's voice rose. He questioned not just the Queen's decision, but what or who might have influenced it. At that moment, it was no longer about Harry. It was about the monarchy itself. A monarchy now defined not by stability, but by secrets and divisions. As tensions escalated, Camilla attempted to intervene, urging calm and restraint. But Anne, who had arrived quietly midway through the conversation, spoke only once, and that was to shut Camilla down. Let them finish, she said. Her tone was cold. Final. The conversation ended without resolution. There were no apologies, no reconciliations. Just a chilling realization. If even the future king no longer trusted the institution's inner workings, what hope was there for those outside its walls? William left with more questions than answers, and a growing fear that the monarchy he was set to inherit was already beginning to rot from within. And just when it seemed the damage had peaked, a final envelope emerged, one that changed everything they thought they knew about Queen Elizabeth's intentions. A letter, misplaced in the palace archives, carried the Queen's truest words. But once it surfaced, the royal family learned that even death couldn't bury every truth. It wasn't meant to be found. Tucked into a file buried deep within the royal archives, the sealed envelope was discovered by a junior archivist cataloging personal correspondence for historical preservation. It bore no official stamp, no crest, only a simple, deliberate address in the Queen's familiar script. To all my children and grandchildren. It was Anne who was informed first, and when she read the handwriting on the envelope, her expression changed instantly. Without a word to press or staff, she demanded a private family gathering at Windsor. No aides, no media, just blood. Inside the letter was a final confession, one the Queen had written not for history books, but for the hearts she was leaving behind. She spoke not with the voice of a monarch, but of a mother and grandmother, who had watched her family fracture beneath the weight of expectation, pride, and silence. She admitted what no royal had dared say out loud, that her will, though precise in its structure, had been a compromise with duty, not a declaration of love. She hadn't excluded Harry to punish him. She had done it to protect the crown from further collapse. But in doing so, she confessed, she feared she had lost something more valuable, trust. Each word struck with the force of a lifetime of restraint unraveling in ink. She wrote of watching her sons fight silent wars across decades, of seeing her grandchildren drift into public battlegrounds disguised as interviews and headlines. She reflected on Anne's unwavering sense of duty, William's strength, Catherine's grace, and yes, even Harry's fire. She admired his courage, even if it cost them peace. But the Queen had always believed that a monarch must sometimes sacrifice personal desire for institutional survival. And in that cold arithmetic, Harry had been the greatest loss. The family sat in stunned silence. For some, it was vindication. For others, unbearable weight. Harry reportedly left halfway through, unable to listen any longer. Not out of disrespect, but heartbreak. The words he had longed to hear, confirmation of love, understanding, remorse, had come too late. The Queen's final line was the most devastating. "I hope you forgive me, even if you never understand me." No one spoke after the letter was finished. Anne folded it back into its envelope, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the cost of what she had carried alone. Charles reportedly said nothing for several minutes. William sat staring into the distance. For Harry, the Queen's letter was not closure. It was an echo, an apology never spoken in life, a truth revealed when it could no longer change anything, and that truth would haunt them all. But forgiveness would not come easily, and for Harry, it meant walking away from the monarchy one final time, on his own terms. For Harry, the final break wasn't just from the will, it was from the idea that he ever truly belonged. As he vanished from royal life, he left behind a family still haunted by what could have been. The letter was the last straw. Whatever thread of hope Harry had been clinging to was severed in that quiet room in Windsor. The Queen's final words, though dressed in regret, offered no redemption. They explained her decision, but they didn't heal it. And Harry, once the boy who walked behind Diana's coffin with the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders, now carried a different burden. The truth that even in her final act, his grandmother chose the crown over him. The damage was done. The pages of the monarchy had turned without his name printed on them. He didn't protest, he didn't lash out. He simply disappeared. Quietly, but firmly, he declined every royal invitation that followed. No Easter service. No summer garden parties. Not even the discreet memorial gatherings held in Balmoral. Even when asked to attend private family events with no cameras, no press, he said no. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. The illusion of family had finally been shattered. What remained was ceremony, tradition, and silence. And Harry no longer wanted any part of it. Meghan, who had once been blamed for pulling him away, was now the only person holding him together. She became his confidant, his anchor, the only one who never asked him to choose between truth and loyalty. His relationship with William remained strained, if not broken. Words between them, when they came at all, arrived through legal intermediaries, brief, emotionless, transactional, not brothers, not even friends, just two men raised in the same storm, now walking different coasts of the same fractured empire. Every effort to reconnect was met with hesitation that grew into distance. For William, duty demanded discretion. For Harry, dignity demanded distance. Anne, who had carried her mother's secrets and endured Harry's heartbreak, did something no one expected. She sent Harry a handwritten note. Short, simple, honest. "You were loved," it read, "but the crown is merciless." No explanation, no apology, just a truth that Harry had always sensed, now laid bare by the only royal who had dared to meet him eye to eye. Public sympathy shifted. The same press that once vilified Harry now softened. Stories of his rejection by the monarchy stirred unease across the Commonwealth. Supporters began questioning the values of an institution that could discard one of its own so coldly. But inside the palace, fear was mounting. Not for Harry, but for the monarchy's image. Because when a system designed to protect tradition is seen turning against its own blood, the world begins to wonder if the tradition is worth protecting. In the most symbolic gesture yet, Harry reportedly opened a chest containing his personal heirlooms. Inside was a royal crest, embroidered into a ceremonial uniform gifted to him after his first overseas tour. And in silence, he removed the crest. Not in anger, but in finality. It was no longer his. It never had been. And yet, just as the monarchy seemed poised to harden its heart forever, a final twist awaited one last revelation Anne had kept hidden, even from the king. In a quiet interview meant to honor her mother's legacy, Princess Anne uttered a sentence that stunned the nation and finally set Harry's heart free. It wasn't scheduled to be headline news. It was meant to be a reflective piece, an intimate, respectful conversation marking 1 year since Queen Elizabeth's passing. The BBC correspondent had been chosen carefully, someone trusted by the firm, someone who knew where the lines were drawn. But what no one expected was that the most private royal of them all, Princess Anne, was about to cross one. As the interview unfolded with calm recollection and guarded warmth, the host delicately approached the topic of the Queen's will, expecting little more than the familiar refrain about legacy, service, and continuity. But then, with a tone that carried both exhaustion and resolve, Anne said, "The Queen wanted reconciliation. She just ran out of time." The room fell into stunned silence. The interviewer, visibly caught off guard, asked for clarity. Anne didn't hesitate. She admitted without deflection that she had pleaded with her mother to reconsider Harry's exclusion, that she had warned of the emotional consequences, of how history would interpret such a harsh decision. But the Queen, always ruled by duty before emotion, refused to alter the final draft, not because she didn't love Harry, but because, in her words, he left the path, and the path must endure. Then came the most jaw-dropping revelation. Anne disclosed that the Queen had written one final document left unsigned in her private study, a symbolic gesture meant for Harry. Not a legal amendment, but a personal testament that acknowledged his role in the family and included a single powerful phrase, "No matter the path, you remain a part of me." It was never delivered. It remained in draft form until after her death, when Anne found it among her mother's belongings, folded and tucked beneath a photo of Harry as a boy. The public's reaction was instant and emotional. Social media exploded with messages of heartbreak and fury. Commentators debated the Queen's legacy in a new light. Sympathy for Harry surged like a tidal wave across the globe. It wasn't just about inheritance anymore, it was about identity, forgiveness, and the painful rigidity of tradition. Harry, watching from afar, reportedly broke down when he heard Anne's words, not out of anger, but release. The burden of not knowing, of forever questioning if he had been unloved, was finally lifted. Not resolved, but lifted. Anne closed the interview with a line that echoed through the nation like a bell tolling through fog. "We lost more than just a prince, we lost our bridge to the future." It wasn't a condemnation of the monarchy, but a warning that in its pursuit to survive, the crown had overlooked the one soul who might have helped it evolve, and in doing so, had fractured something it might never regain. And with that, the crown marches on but forever changed. Because behind the glamour and gold, the real royal legacy may be the heartbreak no one ever wanted to face. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.